Hey guys, so today I'm going to be doing a video that I was going to do at the end of the year. I just did a favorites video last month talking about 3 of my favorite books because a lot of people were asking me to talk about some of the books I was reading in my videos, so I was like, okay. So I put them in a favorites video, and so many of you got excited about the idea of doing like my end of the year wrap-up video talking about all the books that I read throughout the year. So I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to do that if you guys are interested in that idea. Well, I got to thinking about it and I realized that I was going to have way too many books by the end of the year and the video would be really long. So I was like, I'm just going to split it up into 2 parts, mid-year and end of the year. So I'm going to go over all the books I read from January to July, and then at the end of the year what I'm going to do from July to December. So it's not going to be as long of a video. So for those of you that were excited about that video, you get it a lot sooner than you thought you were. And if you guys are wondering how I read so much like as a mom, I've developed a habit, like this bad habit, where I have to read before bed. I don't have to read before bed, but when I do, I fall asleep way faster, way easier, and I stay asleep sounder. And so I read every single night before bed. So usually I'll get into bed at like 11 or 11:30, and then I'll read for a little while, and then I sleep so much better, and I just fall asleep so much faster. And so it's caused me to read a lot of books. I also read a little bit throughout the day if I'm really into a book, but mostly it's just like at night because it just makes me feel so tired and I'm just like, I just fall asleep. These 3 books, Finding Freedom right here, The Ghosts Among Us right here, and Intensity. I'm gonna put a link to the video where I talk about these books right up here, and I think it's on this side. And it's gonna be a card, so if you guys are interested in these 3 books, definitely go watch that video because I talk all about them in that video. But these were in a favorites video, so these ones were amazing. I love these books, so definitely check out that video if you wanna hear about these books. Very good books. The next 2 books I wanted to talk about are actually 2 fail books, which sucks because I had really high hopes for these 2 books. This is Oliver Sacks' The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and this is Oliver Sacks' Awakenings. Okay, so if you guys didn't know this about me, I love psychology and I love learning about like different things that go on in the brain. So basically what this book is about is bizarre neurological conditions that are just very rare, things that, you know, doctors are like, what? Like, where the heck did that come from? Just things that are just bizarre and strange and like anomalies. And the guy that this book is titled off of was a man who would look at something, but he couldn't comprehend what it was. Like he mistook his wife for a hat. Like he thought his wife was his hat. He just couldn't comprehend like things around him, like what he was looking at. And there's so many weird neurological conditions in here where you're like, oh my god, that is so strange. And even though this book was good, it was good for what it was. I'm not a fan of Oliver Sacks in general as an author. I think he's kind of boring. He's a doctor, and I think he writes more like a doctor versus like an author. So his books get a little bit drawn out, a little bit redundant, and I found myself skimming a lot of pages, and I was just a little bit disappointed in these books because I really wanted to like them and I was really excited to read them, but they just didn't turn out to be what I wanted them to be, and that always sucks when that happens. This book is basically a book about a severe case of like Parkinson's disease, and they called it like the sleep disease, and it's about patients that are in like severe states of like catatonia, and they're like frozen in time, and they'll be frozen for like years. It is a really interesting book. The thing that I didn't like about this book was it was a little bit redundant. I felt like I was reading the same story over and over again. It was interesting and I liked reading it, but this was also a book that I felt like I was kind of skimming through. So that was the only downside to these books. Like, they were interesting, I'm not gonna lie, but I just found myself skimming them a lot. And if you like brain conditions and neurological disorders and stuff like that, definitely give these a try. These have really high reviews, but I just found them to be just a little bit on the slow and a little bit on the bland side at times. So this book is called A Work of Art by Melody Masonette. Now this book was really random. So I actually got this book for free from the library, and the lady was like, you could pick any book that you want and you can take it home for free. And so I was like, oh cool, okay. So I went over to the book section, and right when I was like looking through the books, Emery starts crying and she's like screaming in the library, and I'm like, oh my god. So I saw this one, I was like, work of art. I like scanned the back, and it's about like a dad and a daughter who are both artists. So I was like, oh cool, it's just like Travis and Elena. So I picked up this book really quickly, had no idea what it was about, and took it home because Emery was like screaming in the library. This turned out to be such a like page turner of a book. It was so good. It was very dark subject matter, something I was not expecting at all. Basically, it's about a dad who is a comic book artist, and he's a famous artist, and his daughter, who he has trained his whole entire life to be a good artist as well. She's super passionate, and she looks up to her dad, and it's like this dad-daughter relationship, and it's all based around art. But then her dad gets convicted of a crime and he gets arrested, and she's trying to prove that he is innocent. But there's like this crazy twist, and it's kind of a disturbing book, but at the same time, it was a page turner of a book. It was just a really well written book where you're just like, oh my god, like I really want to see what happens. I really like this book. It's a young adult book, but it was really good. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. So this book is called For One More Day by Mitch Albom, and this book was probably one of my favorite books I read this year. This was also a page turner. I read this book really quickly. It's very thin. It's not a hard book to read at all, but it is such a good book. It's about a man who gets to spend one more day with his deceased mother, and it just makes you feel so strongly for this character. Like, this character is so troubled, but at some points in this book, like, you just feel like he's a child and you just want to give him like such a big hug. And I actually teared up when I read this book. And if you guys have read this book, it's when his mother is walking away from him, and I was like oh, crying to me is like just like tearing up. But it was, I just wanted to give the character a hug so bad. It is such a good book, and even though this is a fiction book, there's still a part of you that's like, but is it? So, I don't know. I just thought it was really good. You guys definitely should read this. I was so intrigued by this book the whole entire time, and it was really, really good. Now, this book is something that I found at Goodwill. Super random, but I kept picking it up because the title of this book really drew me in. And I would pick it up and I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna get it. And then I'd put it back on the shelf. And I'd be like, you know you want it, so I pick it up again, and I put it on the shelf, and then be like, Carah, just get the damn book. So I pick it off the shelf again. Finally, I bought it because I knew deep down I wanted to get it. And it's called Putting Makeup on Dead People by Jen Violi. And this was one of those books, it's like a coming of age book, which I love coming of age type books. So it's basically about a girl who comes from a very conservative, like religious family, who wants her to like become all these really great things and wants like this straight-laced girl. And she realizes that she actually is interested in becoming a mortician, and she really becomes passionate about this idea of becoming a mortician. And it was a really good book. I really enjoyed this book. If you don't like coming of age stories, then you're not gonna like this probably, but I've always been kind of interested in this field because I went to college at a college that had cosmetology, which is where I went to school, but they also had funeral sciences, and I was always like, funeral sciences, like becoming a mortician, like what would that be like, you know? And I remember I had a friend in my cosmetology class who actually got to do makeup on one of the corpses. And I was like, what? And I remember thinking that I wanted to try it. I just wanted to see what it would be like. So when I saw this, I was like, you gotta read this, Carah, just read it. And I really liked it. That was a really off-topic story, but I liked it. I just thought it was interesting. So if you like coming of age books, then you'll probably like that one. This next one is something that I wanted to read, mostly because I'm a vegetarian and I heard good reviews on it. And it's called The Vegetarian by Hong Kong. And this book was a pretty quick read. It's a shorter story. This book was good. I'm not gonna lie, I really liked it. I read it really, really quickly. But the thing that I didn't like about this book was the ending. The ending bothered me. I wasn't happy with the ending. If you've read this book, please let me know if I'm the only one that felt that way, because when I read the reviews online, nobody said that. And I was like, is it just me that didn't like the ending? I don't know, I was just disappointed in it. But this has gotten really, really good reviews. It's basically about a woman who has a dream, and the dream causes her to become a vegetarian in a culture that eats a lot of meat, and her family doesn't approve, her husband doesn't approve, nobody approves of her, and then she slips into this crazy psychological like breakdown. And it's a really interesting, kind of darker, heavier read, but it's a very good book. I really enjoyed it. I was just not happy with the ending. This next book was one of my favorites. This is called The Psychopathy Test, and I found this on a TED Talks, and it's by Jon Ronson. And if you guys watch a lot of TED Talks like me, then you may have seen his, and I was like instantly like, Carah, you need to read that book. It's like right up your alley. And basically it's about the test that people give to psychopaths to diagnose them with psychopathy. And it is so interesting. The whole book, I was just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. You just read it and you're like, I think I know a psychopath. And you probably do know a psychopath because it talks about how just regular people are psychopaths. People that rule the world are psychopaths. A lot of politicians are psychopaths, and a lot of like CEOs of companies are psychopaths. Like, it's just insane, and it's really interesting. And then there's a story in here about a man who tricked like the system into making them think he was a psychopath so he could go to a mental institution instead of going to prison, because he thought it'd be easier to get out of a mental institution than it would be to get out of prison. So he ended up going to a mental institution, but then they wouldn't let him out because he couldn't prove that he wasn't a psychopath. There's more to the story, but it's a really interesting thing. So if you really like books about like just, you know, psychology in general, then this is definitely going to be a must read for you. I really liked it, and I thought it was really interesting. So this book is called Brain on Fire, My Month of Madness by Susanna Callahan, and this book literally caught my eye on the shelf. I was walking through Fred Meyer, and I never buy books at Fred Meyer, ever, but I was just like walking through the book section, and I saw this book on the shelf, and I was like, read the back of that book. So I like picked it up, read the back, and I was like, what? I need to read this book right now. So I bought it, and I got home and I started reading it, and I was like, it was just meant to be. Basically, she was a reporter for the New York Post, totally normal girl, very, very smart, outgoing, and then all of a sudden she just went crazy, and she was in like this severe state of psychosis, and the doctors didn't know what was wrong with her, and they had to run all these tests, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. And it's such an interesting book from the patient's perspective, and I liked this because I've read, like I said, Oliver Sacks, who's the doctor writing, and I found them very, very bland and boring. But because this was written by the patient, I was like, oh my God, that is so interesting and fascinating. So I loved this book. It was probably one of my favorite books that I read so far this year. And oh, it was so interesting. So like I said, if you like the same types of things as I do, then you'll probably really like this book. And this is also being made into a movie, I hear, so that's really awesome too. Last book. This book is something that you guys have probably read, because a lot of schools will have their students read this book. They'll assign this book to read, and I never read this book, but this book has had so many good reviews. It's kind of like one of those cult classic type books, and I don't know what made me read this book. I have absolutely no idea, but I was like, just read it. Like, it has so many good reviews. So many people say, like, I never really wanted to read this book, and then I finally did, and I was just like blown away by it, and I was like, I just feel like I should read it. And I did, and it ended up being one of my favorite books that I read ever in my life, and it's called The Outsiders by S.C. Hinton. And it's gonna sound like a weird book. You're gonna be like, I don't want to read that, but I'm telling you, like, it was so good. And basically it's about I think it's like five greasers, and they're in like this perpetual war with I think they pronounce it Soch, but I say Sox because it just made more sense to me. But they're in like this perpetual war with the Sox, and the Sox are like the social, like the popular social rich kids. And it just kind of teaches you a lesson that everybody is the same and nobody is really that different. And you just grow to love the characters so much in this book. Like, you just literally love every single character in this book. And you guys have probably heard the main quote that everybody quotes from this book, "Stay gold, pony boy, stay gold." That's from this book, and a lot of people tattoo "stay gold" on their bodies, but it's from this book, and it is so good. I loved it, and for somebody that doesn't really care about greasers and all of that stuff, like, I wouldn't have thought I would have liked this book, but it was probably one of my favorite books I've read in a very long time. I really, really liked it, and it's just so freaking random. So that is it for now for the books that I've read so far this year. Who knows what my end of the year one is going to be like. Who knows if I'm going to have a lot of books or a little bit. I never really know. Sometimes I go, like I said, through reading slumps where I like don't read at all. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this. For those of you who do like to read and do like just literature in general, then you guys are really going to like this video. If you don't, I'm sorry, but you don't have to deal with these videos very often because I'm not going to post them all the time. I'm not a booktuber or whatever. So anyways, that's it guys, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye!